in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, welcome. This is Cory Frogley, and you are joining us for our Facebook Live in the Blue event. And I am extremely excited to be with you today, especially with my guest, sharing our holiday broadcast on December 22nd. We want to wish everybody a happy holiday, and we've got Neal with us, Inscoe, and we're so excited because he's actually been part of the Blue IQ family for the last probably 6 months to a year, and has worked with a few clients now using Blue IQ. And again, remember, Blue IQ is all about bringing you tools of scale. And the reason why Neal plays such an important part of this is because as you scale your business, it becomes more valuable. And the topic we're going to talk about today is that ability then to transition. Like, at some point, you're going to have to sell your practice. And when you do that, obviously you want it to be as valuable as possible and get as much out of you can for retirement, to live the life that you want to live. And that is what Neal is a master at, a master at financial planning, making sure that when you hit retirement, you've got cash flow, you've got security, and you can really live the life that you want to live. So Neal, welcome, and thank you for joining our program today.
Well, thanks, Cory. I appreciate being here.
So I'm going to pull up your presentation that you shared with me, and this is going to take us through a few of these slides. So you'll be able to see this in just a second, Neal, as I share my screen with you, and that way you can see that. Can you see that now, Neal?
I can.
All right. So this is the transition. So Neal, give us a little bit of background about yourself, because I've got your bio here, but again, as I shared with our audience, what you've been a master at, but you created and sold multiple businesses over your lifetime. Share with us a little bit about your experience and your success.
Well, as an advisor, I've always been somebody who loved businesses. And so I focused from the very beginning back in 1983 to work with business owners. And I've owned several businesses. I've sold several businesses. So I really understand the business owner mind and what they have to go through. And about 10 years ago, I got involved with transitions. I had a doctor come to me and tell me that he wanted to transition his business, and I looked into it, and I really found that there was a large need to be able to combine not only the sale of the business, but all the legal documents that are needed, as well as being able to know the financial implications. And I probably met 100 doctors in the first year while we were going around the country giving seminars on transitions. And in interviewing them, they really were very concerned about the value they were getting from brokers. They wanted to make sure that the attorneys were helping them in the way they should. And of course, they didn't really feel like a lot of their CPAs were being as involved with their business as they could be. And I also work with CPA firms. And so I've found through talking with them that oftentimes about 80% of the time, they don't even know their clients are selling their businesses. Wow. So those three advisors are really key, and there's just a real need to be able to have all of them in one camp. So what I did was I decided to go out and work with attorneys and CPAs, and we bring together a very specific group of people and create a team for an individual so that they have what they need when they're going to transition the business.
Yeah, and that's such a needed aspect. And the reason, again, why Neal and I connected is because, as our audience knows, we really specialize in small, mid to small practices, whether that's in dental, small to medium-sized DSOs, single practices, chiropractic offices, integrated medical facilities. And that's one of the things as we get into your presentation here about that whole concept of, I know for me, I'm kind of what I would say mid-career. I've built practices, I've sold some, I've here still actually have a active practice that I don't have to be in the daily operations, but it's not necessarily in my mind at this age of that cell. So what do we bring up this first slide for you about how many people don't plan. Like, what should I be doing now to prepare the inevitable transition?
Well, I think that you need to be thinking about it. You need to be thinking about when you might want to transition. The longer transitions are actually the more successful ones, the ones that are planned. You have a process, a protocol that you're going to follow. And I know that everybody thinks, well, I'm ready to go ahead and let's retire. I want to start thinking about my business. That's really about my business and selling it. That's really too late. I
Yeah.
had an interview the other day with a doctor who was interested in transitioning, a chiropractor in Florida. And I asked him a bunch of really important questions about what he wanted to do. And the next time we got on the phone, he said, I've talked with my wife and I've thought about the questions that you ask, and nobody's ever asked me those questions before. And I don't think I'm ready to do it now. I want to wait. I need a couple more years to be able to, I had some conscious thought about it. So
Yeah.
that's what you have to do. You have to sit down and say, all right, are we going to transition? When are we going to transition? How do we want to transition? And what are the things that we need to do to transition? And more importantly is the financial implication. I have another dentist. I started almost 10 years ago with him, and he sold 50% of his practice and brought an associate in. And now he's ready next year.
Mm.
And we've gone through 9 years of planning and positioning with him.
Wow.
And so now everybody's already integrated in with the new associate and his new partner. And now it'll be an easy transition for him because we know the direction that we want to go. So the best
Is
is to plan and plan ahead.
is my perception then that a lot of these doctors, right? They're ready to retire. They want to sell their practice, but buyers of these practices know that the valuable piece is the relationship between the doctor and the patient. And if we remove the doctor from the practice, the value of the practice dramatically drops. Is that what you're solving? Is that plan of bringing in the right associate, bringing in the right buyer, so that over time the relationship disconnects from that particular provider and the transition of the patients happens and the value remains high. Is that what you're proposing?
Well, yes, you're talking about the goodwill of the practice. Like you and your practice and your patients and the people that you've seen, they look forward to you kind of like a family member. You've built a practice with people that you know in the community and that you've helped, and they feel that you're the one to go to. So that
Right.
goodwill is really important. The issue with the goodwill also has become somewhat of a problem for the individual that doesn't tell the staff that they're going to transition the business, and on Friday they sell it, and Monday morning they show up and say to the staff, well, here's your new owner, have a nice day, I'm leaving at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that by the way, that's a lawsuit waiting to happen, because the individual who's leaving or exiting has to do everything they possibly can to transition that goodwill over to that new owner. So the longer
Yeah.
period of time is always better.
Hmm. That makes sense. So you bring up an interesting slide here that business sale is a big part of retirement. 68% people are dependent upon that income for retirement, but only 11% are actually planning that over the time.
Right. Well, remember, you're so busy with your day-to-day activity in your business, and then when you're done, you go home and you want to maybe turn it off, and you want to spend time with family, you want to spend time with your children or your hobbies or other things, and the last thing that's really on your mind is the plan. How do we plan this?
Hmm.
So it's really about having a focus on it. So most professionals have three things. They have their practice, they have a retirement plan, and then they have their house. And they have those three things. Some don't have all three of those things. Some doctors just have one, which is their practice.
Yeah.
So the idea is that we need to look at all of those financial implications in their life and their practice and see how they all come together.
Yeah. No, I like that. Which brings us to this point of knowing what not to do is more important than knowing what to do. So what shouldn't we do that is the big no-no?
Well, I think that you have to tell the staff that you're going to transition. I think that's a real big one. A lot of people don't do that. I have a client who his wife is a hygienist, and that's exactly what that doctor did. he basically put the deal together and announced on Monday morning, guess what, I'm leaving and I'll be gone, in 2 weeks. And didn't, here's this new person that's going to be running this practice. I think that's key. The staff is very intuitive about a person that's coming in, so it's important for them to know so that they can be on board. Everybody,
Yeah.
pulling the oars in the same direction.
Yeah.
And so I think that's key. You have to decide, are you going to sell it and walk away? Or are you going to sell it and work back? Or are you going to create a partnership and bring in a partner? Or are you going to maybe own multiple practices? That's a big thing now. A lot of people are seeing how they can own multiple practices, 2 or 3 or 4, and then they can be bought out by the major companies out there, so they see more of the value. So then they're in the management position, maybe in the last part of their career. So it's important for you to look at those things and in each implication of how you're going to transition. And there's probably 10 or 12 landmines that you could easily step on and potentially not have the transition the way you want.
Hmm. Yeah, and I would suspect that having that plan, and this is part of the kind of the Blue IQ model, is helping our clients in that process of recognizing at what point do you want to go from being in the production, in the practice, to more stepping out of the practice and running it as more of the business owner. Do you find that those doctors that are kind of out of the practice but running it as a business find it easier to transition or have more successful transitions?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues there. I think that when you decide that you're going to work on the business and not in the business, then after about a 3-year period of time with the changes in technology and the changes that go on in each healthcare industry, you got to make sure that you stay up to date with those because you don't want to be out of touch. I always recommend that if you're going to be in that situation, that you at least work 1 or 2 days a month and keep a few patients and or be involved in the activity of the business from that perspective because you want to stay in tune.
Yeah.
So that I think
don't
is really
completely
important.
disconnect. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you're running that business, and you actually will be more effective if you're doing that because you have now a chance to look from the outside and have a 30,000-foot view rather than a 1-inch view, which is usually the way it is. I would say everybody's looking down doing this if you're a dentist or chiropractor, you're running from patient to patient, or a doctor, you're in surgeries and doing those things. It's hard for you to look up and say, wow, I didn't really realize the staff has changed 3 times, or something's happened. It's different in the practice. So I would have to say that if that's the direction that you're going to go, then you need to really focus on your management skills and make sure that you also stay in tune with what's going on in practice.
Yeah. Yeah, and so if you have done that, kind of stepped out of that main, provider role and you're more into that management role and you're running your practice, you're executing and that ability then to spend the time to scale the practice's value. And then that's really what you're turning over, whether you're turning that over to the associate or whether you're turning that over to another group that's buying your and maybe several locations. At least we've seen it from our standpoint that it's a more valuable asset because you're not removing a provider now from that business. The EBITDA that's there that you may be consuming as your pay cut, payroll now gets contributed back onto the EBITDA, which grows that EBITDA, which becomes, the multiplier for that practice.
Well, you and I have consulted with an individual in a transition in Atlanta. And one of the things that you did was you really opened his eyes up to the trial period and how important it was for him to treat this new doctor who was coming in using his education and not having him be the marketing person, right? Well, that allowed him to step outside and look at his practice from a different level. And what it did was it increased the value of the practice by 30 to 50%.
Wow.
So it was pretty dramatic from an income increase. So that's exactly right. What you're saying is so important. When you start going down that role of the working on the practice instead of in the practice, then you start seeing opportunities that you didn't see before, and it will increase your value.
Yeah. I tell you, think about that, audience. If you think about increasing your practice by 30 to 50%, even That took you a whole year to do it, and you were able to put that amount of money in your pocket as you exited this business. So that's big. So here's the question that I get from a lot of our audience is what is my business worth? Like how are they going to value my practice? What's kind of the standard? What percentage of that sale am I going to pay in taxes? And then of course you brought up my employees are my family. I spend more time with some of my team members than I do with my wife and kids. So, of course, we're concerned about them. We want them to have a secure future. Share with us your experience in those three questions.
Well, I'm not a big fan of anybody being a do-it-yourselfer, and I know there's courses and advisors out there who you can sit with for a half a day and get CE credits, and they give you a booklet and say, "Here's a way to do this." I don't know any individual, let alone healthcare professionals, who can negotiate a three-quarters of $1 million asset. So there are some basic things that you have to know when you're going into your transition. So you're right. What's it worth? So you need to go get a bona fide appraisal from somebody who's going to certify, and they're going to use a standard type appraisal using a percentage of either revenues or looking at average of revenues or a variety of different things. So the key is that you have to go get an appraisal. You have to find out. It also plays into the second, which is what are my taxes? And the goodwill is usually the largest portion, usually about three-quarters of the value of the practice. And that's because if the individual is gone tomorrow, a good percentage of those patients are going to leave somewhere, go somewhere else if the practice were to end. Well, they'll all go somewhere, but if somebody new were to come in, it makes it much more difficult. So you have to look at the tax implications. Under current law, and we just had a Tax Reform Act change, under current law, you're talking about a capital gain rate on the goodwill and the covenant not to compete, which represents a large portion of that. So it'll be lower, and then the balance of it at ordinary income. And there are many people that I've talked to who sold their practices and didn't know until after the sale how much taxes they were going to pay. I got a call one day from a doctor who said, "I'm ready to sell my practice." And I said, "Okay, we'll get back to me when you're ready." He sold it and then came back to me and said, "Okay, help me with the tax implications." And I said, "Well, I can't. I mean, I can tell you what they're going to be." And then I couldn't tell whether. And after I told him what the taxes were going to be, and he was in actually a state that had no state taxes, but it was still pretty high. I couldn't tell whether the phone dropped or he dropped or whatever happened. But I mean, I live in California, and the sale of most businesses is about 37% of the value. So somebody works 40 years, has $1 million practice, to give away $370,000 of $1 million is painful.
Yeah.
And then the last is the employees. What's going to happen? They're your family, so you have to talk to them about specifically what their plans are. Are they going to stay? So oftentimes they aren't. That client you and I have been consulting with in Atlanta, he told his staff, and the next day the office manager came in and said, "I'm not going to stay. I'm going to go somewhere else." Well, at least you had a choice. It wasn't a situation where he said it on a Friday, sold it, and then told her on Monday. So it's key to be able to help them to move on with the transition and to coordinate how they're going to work with the new buyer.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Knowledge is key in giving them a choice. So these three things that we've touched on a few of these points, but legal documents and goodwill, the financial implications of the transition, and how the transition can actually affect the owner is important to consider.
Mm-hmm. So the legal documents and the goodwill, these three things, obviously you want good legal documents. And again, and I don't mean this in a condescending way, but we're not selling IPM here. We're really selling a practice. And even if it was $3 to $5 million, it needs some reasonable legal documents that have been drafted and are specific to whatever individual practice or business is being sold. Yeah. And as I said earlier, it's important to pass that business goodwill on because it helps the buyer, because they're buying a cash flow is what they're buying. And they usually are using loan proceeds in order to buy the business. So what they need to do is they need to make sure that it's profitable and keep as many of those patients and keep it growing. And again, as I said before, sometimes there can be lawsuits, and if you don't take care of making sure you transfer over the goodwill.
Hmm.
The financial implications of the transition are almost 100% of the time overlooked. And what I mean by that is, yes, you might talk to your accountant about what the tax implications are going to be. And yes, you might talk to your financial planner, your investment advisor, your broker about how much money you have in your pension plan or what your house is worth or your brokerage accounts or those things. But you have to put it all together and do an actual calculation to determine what the proceeds of the business are going to bring, what the after-tax implications are going to bring, and then look at all the other assets and where it's going to come from income, because you're switching from basically owning the ATM machine to selling the ATM machine.
Right.
And so you're not going to have any opportunity after that to generate more income. So what we do is we create what we call the lifetime income and estate projection for transition. So if the listeners go to our webpage, which is getequity.com, and that's equity with an I, and go to the resources section, there's a video that's about 4.5 minutes long that talks about the financial implications of the transition, how important they are, and it details out exactly what you need to be looking for.
Nice.
And a big part of it, of course, is your tax projection inside of there. And as we talked about taxes earlier, we've been successful in selling practices over the last 10 years and probably saved our clients $1.5 million just in planning that we've done in positioning the assets and then looking at tax reduction strategies and those things. So that's a big part of the financial implication. I want a person to know exactly what that transition is going to look like before they do it, before they ever sign the papers, so that they know where their income's coming from and they can know they have security.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is how it's going to affect you. I mean, if you've been in a business 40 years and you've now created this family, and they're your patients or they're your customers or your clients, you now have, I've talked to a lot of doctors and I said, how does it feel to do those things? And they said, it really gives me a sense of purpose. So the minute you sell that business and now you don't have that sense of purpose, it can affect you. So we need to have those conversations. Like I said earlier about that doc in Florida, I think he really realized he just wasn't ready to let go of all those patients. And I actually did a transition about 5 years ago with a doctor in Pennsylvania, and I told him, you have to be very aware of the change you're going to go through. And even today, he's still having trouble being able to have a life after dentistry. And it's because it was his entire life. And his kids are all grown now and gone, and empty nest syndrome, and it all hit him, and he literally fell off the earth. I mean, it's crazy how depressed he got. So it's really key to sit down and have that conversation before you're going to sell that business.
Yeah, especially nice to have somebody who's helped so many people through that process like yourself. So that those are some great points. We appreciate you starting the conversation today with Neal, and those of you who are joining us. Again, listen to what Neal has shared with us today. If you're even within 10 years of stepping out of practice and retiring, it's now's the time to plan. Start planning for those tax implications. Start planning for the emotional transition that's going to take place. What is the sense of purpose you're going to discover once it's not every day in front of your patients? A lot of our audience is really now building their business, their empire. They're scaling their locations, and as they're doing that, again, understanding your ability to package that together, look at the big picture of your portfolio and everything else, the financial piece coming together. So, Neal, phenomenal information today. Again, you can go to Neal's website. We've posted it in our share today. And again, getequity.com. You can see equities with an I, and you can continue the conversation with Neal. Neal, thank you so much for joining us today, and happy holidays to you and your family. Sunny California. I'll actually be there in about 4 days, so I'm going to come down and enjoy some of that warm weather.
Oh, yeah, please do, and thank you, Cory. I really appreciate what you're doing. To me, informing our clients and individuals out there, business owners, is really important. I mean, as you know, it's tough to own and run a business, and it's important to have as much knowledge as you can. And so anything having to do with operating a business or being involved in a transition, the listeners, please call me, because I'd rather try to give you some direction on the best way to go versus have you make a mistake and have it cost you.
Yeah, and again, to our audience, Neal is such a giving guy. He'll have phone conversations with you. He's not going to put you on the clock. He's going to work with you. He's gonna answer those questions. And then if you do choose to go through his services, which are amazing, at that point you can begin a relationship. But connect, subscribe to his blog, get that information, because information is power. So Neal, again, thank you for being with us. Again, watch In the Blue every Friday. We're here 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern. We are going to be out with the holiday, but we're right back with the new year with great information. Again, tools of scale. That's what Blue IQ is all about. Thanks for being with us today, and again, happy holidays.